I'll always come back for you.
19 years of experience. In here, you're still just a bay boy. Give me one engine. I'll show you what 19 years.
If I miss one more shift, my children and I lose our apartment.
This repair costs $41, not $308.
You just cost me $260. Get your tools, you're fired.
She needed help. One day your rules will cost you everything.
Daniel, what are you doing here? Today, those customers decide whether you keep your company. Thanks for watching. Follow A Brighter Destiny for more powerful stories, and don't forget to subscribe.
The day Daniel Hayes lost everything. It wasn't the judge's signature that broke him. It was watching his 8-year-old daughter press her palm flat against the back window of a car that no longer belonged to him. The house was gone. The savings were gone. The blue Ford pickup he'd rebuilt with his own hands 3 summers earlier was gone too. And as the sedan pulled away from the curb on Maple Ridge Court at 4:52 in the afternoon, carrying his daughter Emma toward a life he wasn't part of anymore, Daniel stood alone on the sidewalk holding a cardboard box that used to be a case of copy paper. Inside it were 2 faded t-shirts, a photograph of Emma missing her front teeth, a rusted 7/16 wrench that had belonged to his own father, and exactly $217. Owl City, standing on that street, that afternoon, would have guessed that this same man would one day stand in a boardroom in downtown Tulsa and watch another man's career collapse, in real time, simply by walking through a door. Before we go further, if you believe people deserve a second chance, even when the world has already written them off, take a second right now to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the Hidden Stories channel. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Now, back to Daniel. The August heat in Tulsa that year sat on the city like a wet blanket, and Daniel spent his first nights sleeping in a room above a laundromat on 11th Street, the kind of room where the window unit rattled louder than it cooled. He kept the ceiling fan running anyway, shirtless in the heat, staring at water stains shaped like continents. His marriage to Rachel had ended after 4 years of slow, quiet distance that neither of them had the courage to name, until it was too late to fix. The court gave Rachel the house because Emma needed stability, and Daniel understood that, even as it hollowed him out. What actually broke him wasn't the house. It was the calendar. Every other weekend. 2 weeks in July, that was all he had of his daughter now, measured out like rationed water. For 19 years Daniel had worked as a mechanic. The kind who could stand beside a running engine, close his eyes, and tell which cylinder was misfiring, before the customer finished describing the sound. He understood torque the way some men understand scripture. But running engines didn't pay rent in a town where every real shop already had 3 mechanics on staff, and a waiting list of applicants twice that long. On a Tuesday morning, wearing a faded olive t-shirt, cut-off work shorts and boots, with the stitching coming loose at the toe, Daniel walked into Whitfield Motors, the biggest repair chain in the eastern part of the city. 12 bays and a lobby with a fountain in it. The owner, Gary Whitfield, a heavy-set man in a pressed polo, who'd never once had grease under his fingernails, looked Daniel up and down for exactly 4 seconds before speaking. "We don't really hire outside guys," Gary said, not looking up from his clipboard. "We prefer people who came up through our own training program. Standards matter here." Daniel had 19 years of standards in his hands. But he said thank you anyway and left. He came back the following week, and the week after that. On his 4th visit, Gary finally offered him something, not a mechanic's position, but a temporary bay assistant role at $11 an hour, cash under the table, no benefits, no schedule guarantee. Daniel took it. $217 doesn't last long in a laundromat room, even a cheap one. What followed were 3 months that Daniel rarely spoke about afterward, even years later. Gary ran Whitfield Motors like a courtroom, where he was the only judge, and the customers were always guilty of not spending enough. He had a rulebook, laminated 61 pages, and he quoted it the way some men quote the Constitution. Rule 43. No discounts ever under any circumstance for any reason. Rule 51. Every diagnostic includes a minimum of 2 upsell recommendations, whether the vehicle needs them or not. One Thursday in October, at 9:14 in the morning, an elderly woman named Loretta Pruitt brought in a 2009 Buick with a squealing belt. Daniel found the problem in 6 minutes flat, a $40 part. Gary told the front desk to quote her $1,100 for a full serpentine system replacement she didn't need, banking on the fact that a 71-year-old widow wouldn't know the difference. Daniel pulled Gary aside in the parking lot and told him the truth would take 6 minutes to explain and $40 to fix. Gary's face didn't change. "That's not how we protect this business," Gary said. "You protect margins first. The customer's gratitude comes later. That's Whitfield policy, and Whitfield policy isn't up for a debate with a bay boy." Daniel said nothing. He went back inside and quietly told Loretta Pruitt the real number. She hugged him in the parking lot, right there beside pump 3, and he stood stiff, with his arms slightly raised, unused to being thanked for something so small. Gary saw the whole thing through the office window. He never mentioned it. Not that day. The moment that ended, everything came 6 weeks later, on a Friday, at 10:47 in the morning. A woman named Cheryl Dunham walked in with a Honda Civic that wouldn't start. 2 kids in the back seat, one of them still in a car seat with a cracked buckle, held together with a rubber band. Cheryl worked the overnight shift at a distribution warehouse off the turnpike, and if her car didn't start, she didn't get paid. And if she didn't get paid for 3 days running, she'd already told the front desk clerk, quietly, almost apologizing for saying it out loud, she wouldn't make rent. The part Cheryl needed was a $41 starter relay. Whitfield's official quote, following Rule 43 to the letter, was $380, padded with an unnecessary battery test, and a mandatory diagnostic fee that existed purely on paper. Daniel looked at the 2 kids in the back seat. He looked at the relay, sitting on the part shelf, 11 feet away. And he made a decision that had nothing to do with policy, and everything to do with the kind of man his own father had raised him to be. He installed the part himself, off the clock, during his 15-minute break, and charged her exactly the cost of the piece. $41. No labor. Gary walked out of his office at 11:20 that same morning, and saw Daniel closing the hood, saw Cheryl crying with relief and saw the whole thing plainly for what it was. "You just cost this company $260 in margin," Gary said, loud enough that 3 customers in the lobby turned their heads. "Do you understand what happens if every employee decides they get to be a hero on my dime? This business runs on rules, not feelings. She has 2 kids in that car and a job that starts at midnight," Daniel said quietly. "That's not my problem, and as of right now, it's not yours either," Gary said. "Get your tools. You're done here." He said it in front of the whole shop. He said it in front of Loretta Pruitt's grandson, who happened to be picking up his own car that same morning, and would remember every word of it for years. Packed his one toolbox, the same one he'd carry into that abandoned storage unit weeks later, and walked out into the parking lot past pump 3, past the exact spot where a widow had once hugged him for telling the truth. If you're still with us, this is usually where people say, the story is about revenge. It isn't. Stay with me. Because what Daniel built next had nothing to do with getting even, and everything to do with getting up. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from tonight. Daniel found the storage unit 2 weeks later, on the industrial stretch of East Archer Street, a building nobody wanted. The roof leaked over Bay 2. The concrete floor had a crack running diagonally, corner to corner like a fault line. The rent was $190 a month, because the landlord, a retired oilfield worker named Walt Higgins, had given up hope of finding a real tenant. Daniel signed the lease with the last of his $217, leaving him exactly $27 to his name. He bought a used floor jack from a classified ad for $15. He painted his own sign on a sheet of plywood, the letters slightly uneven, the blue paint dripping at the bottom of the H. Hayes Auto Care, honest work, fair price, He hung it with 2 rusty screws he found in a coffee can Walt had left behind. The first week, nobody came. The second week, 1 customer came, a man whose transmission was slipping, and Daniel fixed it for $60 less than Whitfield would have quoted. Because $60 was the honest number, and nothing more. The third week, 2 customers came. Word doesn't spread fast in a city of 400,000 people. But it spreads true, and true is slower and stronger than fast. Through that whole first winter, Daniel slept some nights in the back office of his own shop, on a folding cot, because the heater in the laundromat room had finally given out completely. And he couldn't afford both rents. He wore 2 sweatshirts under his coveralls. He ate rice and canned beans heated on a hot plate that Walt had also left behind. And every other Saturday, without fail, he showed up outside Rachel's house at exactly 9 in the morning to pick up Emma, in whatever clean t-shirt he owned that day. Because some things a man does not let slip, no matter how far down he's fallen. Summer came back around, the way it always does in Oklahoma, thick and gold and endless. Emma turned 9, wearing a yellow sundress her mother had bought her, and Daniel spent that birthday weekend teaching her to patch a bicycle tire in the shade of the garage's open bay door, both of them in short shorts and t-shirts, sweat on their necks, laughing about nothing in particular. She didn't understand yet what her father had lost. She understood only that he showed up. Every time, rain, heat, exhaustion, none of it mattered, he showed up. The shop grew slowly, the way real things grow, through work rather than luck. By the second year, Daniel had hired his first employee, a man named Marcus Boone who'd done a stretch in county lockup for a check fraud charge a decade earlier, and couldn't get an interview anywhere else in town. Marcus turned out to be one of the best diagnostic mechanics Daniel had ever worked beside. By the third year, Hayes Auto Care had 4 bays and 3 employees, all of them people other shops wouldn't take a chance on. A single mother, a veteran with a bad knee and worse nightmares. A kid barely out of foster care who'd never held a steady job past 90 days. Daniel had a policy of his own, unwritten, never laminated. If a customer couldn't pay, they worked it off. An oil change for 2 hours of yard work. A brake job for a home-cooked meal, delivered to the shop on a slow Tuesday. If an employee needed to leave early for a school recital or a court date or a doctor's appointment, they left, no questions, no docked pay. Word of that spread too, quieter but just as true. By year 6, Hayes Auto Care had 3 locations across Tulsa and a 4th going up in Broken Arrow. By year 8, Daniel had launched something he called the Hayes Family Care Program. Flat-rate maintenance plans priced specifically for working families. No upsells, no hidden fees, the exact opposite of everything he'd watched happen at Whitfield Motors on a Thursday morning, over a squealing belt. Local news did a small segment on it. Then a regional business paper. Then, slowly, investors started calling, the kind of investors who look for companies with unusually low employee turnover, and unusually high customer loyalty, and want to understand why. Here's where the story turns, and I want you to remember every detail we just walked through. Because it all comes back around in about 4 minutes. Comment below with the words, "Still watching" if you're following along. Because what happens next is the part people always say they didn't see coming. By year 11, Gary Whitfield's business had begun quietly falling apart, and not because of Daniel, not directly. It fell apart the way businesses built on Rule 43 tend to fall apart eventually. One furious online review at a time, one lawsuit at a time, one former customer telling a neighbor at a time. Whitfield Motors had expanded too fast on borrowed money, cutting corners on service, the same way it once cut corners on honesty. And by the spring of that year Gary needed capital. His bank had already said no twice. His accountant had already said the numbers didn't work, without an outside investor. Someone on his board suggested a private equity and franchise group that had been quietly buying up regional auto service chains across the Midwest and turning them profitable within 18 months. The group was called Meridian Auto Holdings. Gary had never heard the name Daniel Hayes attached to it. Because Daniel had structured the company that way on purpose, years earlier, never once putting his own name on a door. The first contact was small. A business card, cream-colored, embossed, delivered by courier to Whitfield's front office, with a request for a preliminary meeting. Gary's assistant's aide read the name on the card, out loud over the phone. Daniel R. Hayes, managing partner, Meridian Auto Holdings. Gary didn't recognize it. Why would he? He'd fired a bayboy named Daniel 11 years earlier, and never once thought about him again. The same way a man doesn't think twice about a door he's already closed. The second contact was a phone call, scheduled for a Tuesday at 2 in the afternoon. Gary put on his best polo shirt for a video call, rehearsed his pitch about margins and growth potential and regional dominance. The same language he'd always used. The call connected. And for 11 full seconds, Gary Whitfield said absolutely nothing, staring at a face he hadn't seen since a Friday morning 11 years earlier. Older now, calmer now, but unmistakably the same man he'd once fired in front of a lobby full of customers, for helping a woman named Cheryl Dunham start her car. Daniel, Gary finally said. Gary, Daniel said, it's been a long time. The third contact happened 3 weeks later. In person in a Meridian Auto Holdings boardroom, on the 14th floor of a glass tower downtown. Gary walked in, expecting a routine investment meeting with junior analysts, who would ask about EBITDA and franchise projections. Instead he found a room with 11 board members already seated, and at the head of the table, Daniel Hayes, in a plain gray button-down with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. No watch, no cufflinks. Exactly the same quiet, unhurried presence he'd had 11 years earlier standing beside a running engine. Before we talk numbers, Daniel said, I'd like you to hear from 3 people. The first was Loretta, Pruitt's grandson, now 31, who described in careful, unhurried detail the morning his grandmother had been quoted $1,100 for a repair that cost $40. The second was Cheryl Dunham herself, still working the same warehouse job, her 2 children now in high school, describing a $41 relay, and a man who'd been fired in front of her for installing it. The third was Marcus Boone, Daniel's own first employee, who explained that he'd once applied to Whitfield Motors and been turned away without an interview. The same week, Whitfield fired the only mechanic there who'd ever treated a customer like a human being instead of a transaction. Gary Field sat through all 3 testimonies without saying a word. When it was finally his turn to respond, the room went quiet enough that someone later said, you could hear the air conditioning cycle on. Rule 43 protected this business for 15 years, Gary said. I don't apologize for having standards. Somebody has to protect the margins in this industry, or none of us survive. He said it evenly, without flinching, the exact same words he might have used 11 years earlier in that parking lot. He did not apologize. He never would. Not that day, not in the weeks that followed, not even after his own board voted 7-4 to remove him from operational control within the month. Not even after 2 former employees filed a joint wage violation lawsuit that had been quietly building for years, and finally had the funding behind it to proceed. Whitfield Motors was absorbed into a competitor's franchise within 14 months. Gary Whitfield's name came off the building on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week he'd once fired a man for kindness. Meanwhile, under Meridian's investment, Hayes Auto Care expanded into 11 cities across 4 states, still running on the same unwritten policy Daniel had carried out of that leaking storage unit on East Archer Street. No employee was ever fired for helping a customer who couldn't pay. Every location kept a small unmarked fund, quietly nicknamed the Loretta Fund by the staff who knew the story, set aside specifically for customers who needed a break and wouldn't ask for one. If this story is landing with you, this is the moment to hit that subscribe button. Because Hidden Stories has dozens more like it, and we'd genuinely love to know in the comments, which part hit you hardest tonight. 2 years after the boardroom meeting, a regional business magazine put Daniel on its cover, the headline reading simply, The Quiet Rebuild. Photographers came to the East Archer Street location, the original one, which Daniel had refused to close or renovate beyond necessity, plywood sign and all, now bolted permanently to the wall inside the lobby as a reminder rather than an eyesore. He still kept his father's rusted wrench in his top desk drawer. He still knew the name of every single employee across all 11 cities. A fact his operations team found slightly impossible and slightly wonderful in equal measure. When the magazine finally printed, a copy landed on Rachel's kitchen counter, delivered by a neighbor who knew the history and thought she'd want to see it. She sat with it for a long time, remembering a man who'd once stood on a sidewalk holding a cardboard box, and feeling something that wasn't quite regret, and wasn't quite pride, but sat somewhere honest between the two. The copy that mattered most, though, landed in a college dorm room in Norman, where Emma Hayes, now 20 years old, wearing an old Hayes Auto Care t-shirt she'd spiffed from father's closet years earlier and never given back, opened the magazine to find her own father's face looking back at her. She didn't cry because he was successful. She cried because she remembered the folding cot in the back office, the 2 sweatshirts under his coveralls, the Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock, without fail, rain or heat or exhaustion. She remembered that he showed up every single time. Months later, at a company gathering in a warehouse, Daniel had converted into an event space for exactly this purpose. Standing in front of nearly 400 employees from 11 cities, Daniel told this publicly for the first time, start to finish, without softening any of it. He told them about the cardboard box. He told them about Cheryl Dunham and the $41 relay. He did not mention Gary Whitfield's name, because by then it didn't need mentioning. When I lost the house, I still had my hands, Daniel said. When I lost the truck, I still had 19 years of knowing engines. The last of my money. I still had a reason to get up every morning. And that reason was sitting in the front row of a school play 3 weeks later, and she didn't care that I was wearing the same shirt I'd worn all month. He looked toward the front row as he said it. And there she was, 20 years old now, in a summer dress, clapping harder than anyone else in the room. If you've made it this far, we'd love it if you left a comment simply saying, never give up, and told us where in the world you're watching this from tonight. Life doesn't always return what it takes from you right away. Sometimes the hardest chapter runs longer than anyone thinks it should. But a house can be repossessed. A truck can be repossessed. A bank account can hit zero on a Tuesday morning, and none of it touches the parts of a person that actually matter. Integrity can't be repossessed. Showing up can't be repossessed. And sometimes the man everyone in the room just watched get fired in front of a lobby full of strangers is only a handful of years away from being the one deciding, calmly, quietly, without a single raised voice, exactly how the story ends. Thank you for watching Hidden Stories. If Daniel's story moved you tonight, give this video a like. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that showing up still counts for something. And subscribe more true to life stories about second chances, told the way they actually happened. Sometimes all it takes is $217, one rusted wrench, and a reason not to quit. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.